We are often told that the Founding Fathers were essentially deists. At best, if they believed in God at all, he was a distant God, not one who heard prayers and acted upon them. And yet, amazingly, when the Founding Fathers sat down to hammer out the Constitution in the summer of 1787, things were difficult at first, and we could say that prayer saved the day. Ironically, one of the least orthodox, theology-wise, of the framers was the one who recommended that they turn to God and ask for His help. Thus, we could look back and say, Ben Franklin saves the day.
The creation of the Constitution was done largely in secret. Although it was hot in a day long before air conditioning, windows were reported to be locked shut so no one could hear the proceedings from the outside. No delegate was paid to serve there. Some men had to return to the farm or to their business to keep them afloat. Some of those who left never returned. At first, it was slow-going and acrimonious. Finally, Ben Franklin, the oldest and among the most respected of the Founding Fathers, got up and spoke on June 28, 1787.
Mr. President, the small progress we have made after 4 or 5 weeks' close attendance is, methinks, a melancholy proof of the imperfection of the human understanding. In this situation of this assembly, groping as it were in the dark to find political truth, and scarce able to distinguish it when presented to us, how has it happened, sir, that we have not hitherto once thought of humbly applying to the Father of Lights to illuminate our understanding? In the beginning of the contest with Great Britain, when we were sensible of danger, we had daily prayer in this room for divine protection. Our prayers, sir, were heard, and they were graciously answered. All of us who were engaged in the struggle must have observed frequent instances of a superintending providence in our favor. To that kind providence, we owe this happy opportunity of consulting in peace on the means of establishing our future national felicity. And have we now forgotten that powerful friend? Or do we imagine we no longer need his assistance? I have lived, sir, a long time, and the longer I live, the more convincing proofs I see of this truth, that God governs in the affairs of men, and if a sparrow cannot fall to the ground without his notice, is it probable that an empire can rise without his aid? Ben Franklin.
Overall, the Founding Fathers had a biblical worldview. As one scholar put it, they knew the Bible down to their fingertips. It was one of the least religious of the Founding Fathers who got up during the Constitutional Convention, Ben Franklin, and gave an impassioned speech saying, "Gentlemen, we need to pray." The role and the influence of the Bible in the shaping and creation of America is undeniable.
Ben Franklin, reputed to be the least of the religious founders, actually quoted from Psalm 127:1, "Except the Lord build a house, they labor in vain upon it," and to call the Constitutional Convention to prayer.
The spirit of Ben Franklin's request was honored when they agreed to all participate in a local church's worship service a few days later in Philadelphia. On the 4th of July, the entire convention attended a special service in the Reformed Calvinistic Lutheran Church, where they heard a sermon by Reverend William Rogers.
We fervently recommend to the fatherly notice our federal convention. Favor them from day to day with thy inspiring presence. Be their wisdom and strength. Enable them to devise such measures as may prove happy instruments in healing all divisions and prove the good of the great whole, that the United States of America may form one example of a free and virtuous government. May we continue under the influence of republican virtue to partake of all the blessings of cultivated and Christian society. Reverend William Rogers.
When they met again in the Constitutional Convention, much of the acrimony had subsided, and at least they were able to continue with the assurance that they would complete the task at hand. They worked out a compromise related to slavery. Southern states like North and South Carolina wanted their slaves to be counted in the population as to how many congressional delegates they would get, but these slaves had no rights. So a compromise was struck that actually worked against the slave states. The compromise stipulated that there would not be full congressional representation for people who are slaves, but only partial, 3/5 representation for them. After the Civil War, this 3/5 clause was null and void. In addition to slavery, another sticking point was on the conflict between big states and little states. They wanted to make sure that little states had somewhat equal representation. The brilliant Roger Sherman from Connecticut helped work out a compromise. States with bigger populations would have more members of the House of Representatives than smaller states, but each state would have 2 U.S. senators. They also ensured that each state could participate in national elections and have their voice heard through what we call the Electoral College.
The Electoral College was a brilliant innovation of the founders because they didn't want a democracy, they wanted a republic. To the republic for which it stands. It's in the Pledge of Allegiance. This is a republic. It is not a pure democracy, so there's a check on the popular vote by the states, and that's why they have the Electoral College.
The founders recognized the need for amending the Constitution. They recognized that what they were creating was not infallible and may need revision from time to time.
The Constitution has a provision for it to evolve with the will of the people called the amendment process, where it requires the majority of the people to participate. Our founders wanted to put power in the hands of the people rather than power concentrated into the hands of the few.
They had begun the proceedings on May 25th and eventually finished the task and signed the document September 17th. But the Constitution was not signed by every one of the 55 men who served as delegates to the Constitution. Only 39 of them signed it, a ratio of about 60%. Nonetheless, it was produced and signed to the delight of many, including George Washington.
It appears to me then little short of a miracle that the delegates from so many different states, which states you know are also different from each other in their manners, circumstances, and prejudices, should unite in forming a system of national government so little liable to well-founded objections. George Washington.
How many times have we been told that the founders were basically men of the Enlightenment, by which they mean the framers were essentially godless men who set out to give us a godless Constitution? But the facts of history say otherwise for those willing to read about what actually happened, such as the turning point in the convention when Ben Franklin said, in effect, "Gentlemen, we need to pray." And as we've seen, a variation of his request was acted upon, and they were able to complete the job. Too bad there are many times in life where we treat prayer like it's a last resort. Instead, it should be our first consideration for individuals and for nations. For Providence Forum, I'm Dr. Jerry Newcombe.